We have people still rolling in. I would love it if it might end up being too big of a group to spend time doing introductions. I would, but I'd love for us to all know who's in the room. If you all wouldn't mind adding any organizations you're part of, or any way that any groups that you might want are affiliated with, by putting your putting your arrow, your finger over the bullet points in your picture, and then adding those afterwards. It'd be helpful. All right, so thank you all for joining. People will keep coming. I'll be facilitating today. Hopefully I'll just be sitting back and let the conversation happen. I'm Todd Ferry. I'm with the Center for Public Interest Design at Portland State University. I'm also co-founder of our Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative at PSU. I think I was brought into this group because I was involved with PBOT at the beginning of rolling out the Healthy Businesses plan, of thinking through how to connect the design community for greatest impact and how to do it in an equitable way. In some ways, I think that there were a lot of successes that came out of it. I think in another lens, there were a lot of disappointments that happened along the way. And so I think that we want to acknowledge that. And one starting point as we continue our conversation, I'll hope we'll keep in mind, is that we heard a list of all the groups that are talking about civic commons, about equity. Those are not handed over to those groups to think about. Those are things we want to embed as well here, right? One of the things I first heard when I said I'm getting involved with the Safe Streets program, and one of the first comments I heard back was, safe for who, right? Safe for who? If you're talking about a privatization of public space, then instantly there are concerns based on how you present, how you look. And so I think that we want to keep those things in mind as we're moving forward. Now we're thinking big today, right? We're thinking really big, as we were charged from Commissioner Hardesty.
Thanks.
What we saw was examples of the Healthy Businesses program, which are using kind of existing permitting processes and otherwise to reutilize the streets. If we're to think about the streets, in some ways, there are very few things that have torn our community apart more than streets, and they've certainly been weaponized against communities of color historically in a lot of places. So the idea of thinking about using these as threads and connectors, as places for gathering, for infrastructure, to improve our communities is really an important step. So excited to be here with you all today. We are beginning to we're going to start dreaming big. We're going to start with daydreaming, as was laid out for us. And there's a student from the MERP program here with us today, right?
So, yes. Hi, I'm
Caroline. Yeah.
Great, and you'll be helping to send us to our Jamboard. And can you share with us a little bit about what we can expect from that?
No, I think that's Rohan, but
yeah, like I've just shared the link to the Jamboard, and like it's in the chat. Everyone can access that to post their ideas, and I'll be taking notes of all the discussion going through this in this breakout room.
Great. Thanks so much. So this will be my first time using Jamboard too. It looks a lot like a concept board and Miro and other things I think we're used to have interacted with at some point. So feel free to just jump on there, start throwing on comments as we have a larger discussion, images that you think that you've seen elsewhere that you might want to see, sketches that you've done or dreamed about, and we'll go from there. But as we begin, we're thinking daydream. We're thinking about what are the biggest opportunities in this area for us, right? What are the biggest opportunities in terms of thinking about year-round, multi-purpose public spaces and design for compatibility with walking, transit, and rolling? So I'm going to open it up to see if anybody from what they heard in the conversation have ideas they want to throw out, responses to the presentation, and open it up here and be adding to that Jamboard.
And where's the Jamboard, Todd? I might have to do a Zoom upgrade in order to see it.
Oh, understood. Yeah, thanks, Ken. So you're in the chat. There's a link to Google Jamboard, and so yeah, feel free to open that up. It'll be a separate window, and it looks like Paul has a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I mean, I think a major opportunity to be able to grow in this area is merely access to places to gather. There's a lot of, I mean, obviously there are, you know, these hundreds, 700 plus healthy business permits, but access to where these healthy businesses are is a major issue. I live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a business district, doesn't have a central business district, and doesn't have, I think it has one healthy business permit open. So it's like this doesn't serve this, like the healthy businesses program doesn't serve my neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that people in my neighborhood can't be served by it if part of that included improving access to these areas, to, you know, to places to gather. Like, why can't we gather in the street where in our neighborhoods if we don't have a business district that allows us, that affords us that? Thank you.
That's a great question. And we're going to get, the next part is going to be, why haven't these things happened? And to your point, Paul, I think that we have an immediate answer, which is right now the permitting process transfers temporary ownership of a spot to businesses. What does a transfer look like when it's handed over to communities, and how is that done, right? And in addition to, as you're saying, access to the spaces where these are happening.
Yeah, I'm here, Brad Perkins. I think what we need to be looking at are a number of things. What is the biggest opportunity that we have right now? What's the greatest need? Downtown is definitely number one in my book as to improvements. We have streets down there that are not well used in regards to traffic today. It's over designed for traffic. So how do we begin to break that apart, break that down, and begin to look at how we can not close the streets off? And I'm talking about the north-south grid. Not closing the streets off, but as you guys at PBOT say, how about a road diet? You know, taking a portion of the street and making it so that it becomes part of the community more so than it ever has before. And the way I see it, and I've done a lot of traveling throughout the world and witnessed down in Eugene when I was going to architecture school down there, how they failed as a city to recreate the downtown. They closed off all the streets. And if you go there today, they had to turn the streets back to the people in a way in which it still brought traffic through. So what am I talking about? Well, taking some of the streets like 3rd and 10th and taking half of them away from car traffic and converting them to the other great need down there is permanent residency for these food carts. Eventually those food carts will be gone, just like the ones on the block there across from Target between 9th and 10th. And this is a great opportunity for the city to engage with those vendors as to possibilities that we can create permanent locations on the street in a 20-foot swath of property that is now used for cars, that being the first lane next to the parking lanes. I've given this a lot of thought, and you know, I think the city has done a good job of doing experimentation around town as to letting the merchants decide as to what they want to do on the streets with some help from the city. I think we're at a point now where we take that experiment and do something more permanent. And that what I'm talking about is actual piping in water and sewer to these permanent, I wouldn't call them carts, they're actually buildings. They're structured permanently on the street, and still allows widening of the sidewalk 5 feet and allows 5 feet for bicycles. so that you have 10 feet of the building itself and then 5 feet for the bicyclists. Okay, so what I think needs to happen now, Todd, and it's great that you're part of the Portland State Design Team, and that is getting with, and Nick as well, getting with the idea of great design, maybe make it a contest or something. But the way I see it is that it has to start small, maybe start with 2-block section where Huber's is and up the street in front of the Deacon building, 2 very historic businesses, locations of buildings that we can do some experimentation as to permanent places. Now, when I say permanent, I don't mean really permanent, I mean semi-permanent. That is, these structures are designed in such a way that if need be, they can be dismantled. But because of what happened last summer with the rioting that went on, there needs to be a way in which we're planting these in the ground. This is something that we are going to be taking up on a permanent basis. And then, if it works, being able to continue towards the south, up to Lonsdale Park and on 10th Street, taking the area between Salmon and what used to be Start Street. I think it's Harvey Milk Street now. Taking those 2 streets and progressively grow them into basically a merchant paradise that allows landscaping, permanent landscaping, or in pots or whatever. But that you think of it in terms of having an experiment that becomes permanent and it can grow as it becomes more successful. What I'm saying is that you need to create a new environment down there to bring people back downtown and not going to Lake Oswego have dinner.
Well, I'm glad that you're in this group. You've thought about this down to the starting point, to the phasing, to thinking about taking what's already working, in some ways an asset-based approach, right? Beginning with what's working and thinking about leveraging the kind of those economic incubators that we've seen with food trucks and others, and thinking about how to support that. I love all that. I think that we can, it'll be exciting to think about why that hasn't happened in the next part. I always see Julie and then Nico with hands up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Hammond. I live in Piedmont neighborhood in North Portland. I'm an artist and active transportation interested person. I'll try to keep this short because I know there are a lot of people and I'm so excited to hear from other folks. Something that why I was excited about this group is, what does it mean to design a place where the design of the place is inspirational? I work as an artist. I've worked a lot in theater and also in community engagement. And so I feel seems like there's such an incredible room for the streets to be a scaffold where the way the spaces are physically designed can encourage what happens there, that it's not prescriptive. I think that programming and stewardship are really exciting things, but I feel like there's such an opportunity from the design world to generate user created actions. And I feel especially excited to think about these spaces that are non-commercial spaces. We really suffer in our city, and I think throughout this country, in spaces that are where all people can go and be together, not have to engage in commerce. Not that I'm necessarily against commerce, but I think places like parks and public libraries are important because they are available to everyone, and our streets ostensibly are, and they're just so exciting to think about what those areas are. So I'm really curious from designers and architects, what lessons can be applied to shared physical infrastructure. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that comment, Julie. And I think of the role of design, the role of promoting joy outside of businesses. And as a small note, we have, in terms of this choreographed space, we have the Halpern sequence in Portland is this really unique thing that demonstrates how those ideas can be brought, granted on a small scale, but it can be brought to great results. Nico, and then Anna.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, to me, there's two main things that I would love to have this group think about. One of them is building on what Julie was just talking about, is what are the actual designs that bring people together and activate these spaces? So how do you create like more catalytic design, and how do we figure out the programming for these spaces generally? So that's like a broad, like, love to like have kind of brainstorming around these things and good examples from around the country along that. And then the other side, which I feel like we have to address, even though it might not be the first concern, is that we need to make this a win-win for businesses, right? So shutting down streets, typically the first reaction you get is from the whatever the business is right there that is concerned about how that's going to affect their their livelihood. And so figuring out how it is that we can like design so that we're either fully closing down streets or partially closing down streets, and how a partially closed down street, right? So might be designed that still allows access, but doesn't allow the car to dominate and allows these other programmatic elements to come in. But those would be great things. And I'll say, I mentioned it in the other piece, but University of Oregon's doing an urban design studio starting in April. And this is exactly in the area that Brad was just talking about, is exactly the area that we're going to be looking at. So people who are interested, we would love to have you involved in that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nico. Anna?
Hi, I am an architectural designer and currently working at Integrate Architecture and Planning, which is in the Kenton neighborhood, which a lot of the photos from the presentation are from, with the cool block painting on the street and stuff like that. And I think that was super successful. On the Jamboard, I posted a photo of people doing yoga in a closed down street. That's in Burlington, Vermont, which is where I'm from originally. And basically it's just a fully pedestrian retail area with parallel and adjacent streets for cars and lots of parking, but basically they just bricked in the entire street there. And so that's been pretty successful for many years, for basically as long as I've been alive. And then, so that's kind of one idea that I was thinking would be great in an area like on 23rd, Northwest 23rd, where there's already like a huge retail experience instilled in that neighborhood. And there are lots of smaller adjacent streets that could maybe carry some of the traffic, because I know a lot of those streets lead to the main highway. So that would be obviously a necessity, is, where do we relocate that street traffic that would not create too much congestion also. And I think there are a lot of industrial areas in all of Portland really that could probably carry that load. So I also put on the Jamboard, there are 3 photos of renderings and a plan at the very top. This is a project that I did in art school. I went to California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And this was basically an idea of like how to incorporate work from home and invigorating a neighborhood with retail space. So the upstairs areas are live-in spaces, and then the downstairs are basically retail spaces that are allocated to those residents. So there isn't an issue of commuting to a place that has storefronts and things like that. And it's formatted as sort of like a bazaar type marketplace underneath the apartment building sections, and that bridges over some of the streets. So that creates like a pedestrian bridge over existing streets, which would also be great for existing traffic sort of areas, maybe like on MLK, you know, where there's too much traffic to be able to allocate that car presence. So maybe pedestrian bridges and stuff like that as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Anna. And just so everyone knows, on the Jamboard, we're on the second page of the Jamboard where Anna has graciously shared her project. Thank you for that. I definitely want to get some other ideas out there and thinking big. And Heather, I'll turn it over to you, and then Joel.
Hi there. You can see see if I lean over, you can see my kiosk concept in the back. You know, I had seen a series of kiosks all around Lisbon that kind of blew my mind in terms of placemaking. And they talk about it as this sort of the kiosk strategy for creating safer spaces and more active spaces in parks and plazas that were kind of dead and underused and unsafe because they were unused. And we realized it was kind of an umbrella approach to placemaking. And so you can see our sketch also right above that same image, which is a series of small, medium, and large kiosks. The sort of kiosk post as a wayfinding strategy with art and cultural locations identified. I would never have known about some of the important resources downtown if you were coming from the train station. So that skinny post was designed for that. And these can be used as wayfinding markers for different neighborhoods, but also have an opportunity for narratives about the different communities, culture, history, architecture. And we've been partnering with a solar fabricator to add solar to these and a stockpile of redeployable emergency batteries. So the resiliency opportunities of this is kind of great. And we realize there's an opportunity to also create these kiosks like this one in Lisbon has a bathroom embedded in it, and also provides an incubator space for small local business as well as COVID safe gathering. And they're kind of bomb proof because they're cast iron. It kind of goes with our citywide historic cast iron structures and buildings. And they can also work for potentially houseless villages to provide showers and bathrooms and a staff person. And so we'd love to collaborate more with other neighborhoods or the city and how we might use these as a strategy citywide for wayfinding, as well as placemaking and much needed amenities, furthering our resiliency approach.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Heather. I think we can all immediately see an application for it. It's such an important thing. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm seeing things like that, and then acknowledging that the city is partnering with folks like MIT to explore their kind of emergency hubs, and this seems like something that's more community based, rooted in resilience rather than disaster response.
Both potentially. I mean,
right.
Those batteries could certainly be, you know, accessed by city employees as well as neighborhood emergency staff too, networkers. And I did want to mention, I put another picture in there, which is the Paris Game Library, which was another kiosk approach installed as a mayoral initiative to activate a plaza that was, a side street was being closed to bikes and buses only, and they were worried it was going to kind of kill the plaza a little bit. So they put out these kiosks 3 days a week, and they changed the theme every 3 weeks. And you see houseless people playing, you know, chess with folks in business suits, and no one has to show a credit card or an ID, and they've got, you know, little matching red tables and chairs, very active and dynamic. But then they also had all these great setups for kids and staffed monitors, and it was as a parent, being able to go out and gather in a public space, have a drink, and have some low-cost food is kind of a game changer to sit and watch your child on a playground while doing this in a park. And it's a very European strategy. I think that would be fantastic for our park blocks, but so many places around town, including houseless villages for the kiosks. So lots of opportunities to use these in creative ways.
Thank you for that, Heather. And Woodward Park in Atlanta has a game zone that's got a similar thing and they're using it as a strategy to reach people experiencing homelessness. So you look like you know it.
Or equitable spaces. I'd love to see that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we'll hear from Joel, and then we'll move on to the reality check.
Thanks for sharing that, Heather. I just want to build off of that, and I guess my thought here would be to maybe challenge the earlier idea that was presented on like focusing on downtown and not focusing on downtown. I think when we center commerce and businesses, we have to think about who is that really helping and who's that impacting. You know, if we focus on shoring up businesses and all this, what groups are we excluding? Are we excluding the houses and communities? Whereas if we create those gamified spaces and we center on people and follow that up with businesses, I think we could create more inclusive environments. And I think instead of centering ourselves around downtown, we center ourselves around pockets around the city. So that creates more access, more diversity. But I think the biggest thing that I'd like to hear more of from designers and especially from the city as well is to be focused on people first. You know, somebody mentioned libraries. They're definitely people focused. I think these spaces need to be people focused and not commerce focused. If commerce is a byproduct or it's a secondary step, I'm all for it. And I don't want to devalue the importance of the economy of a city. But I think for so long, that has been the first value and humans have been devalued in place for that. So I think in this opportunity and this change, it's important to value human life first and what we're offering that versus what we're offering commerce and businesses.
Thank you for that, Joel. I think that, yeah, people first, absolutely, and where things go. A couple people asked about that precedence at Woodruff Park. I think I might have said Woodward in Atlanta. So there's a link to it. So we're going to move on to challenges. One thing that just has come up a couple times is just about, in that case, Joel's pointing out that, you know, if it's centralized downtown, that leaves folks out. Another comment was about bringing people there and back and forth. More folks are being displaced from downtown due to higher rent. People are being pushed further and further out. So what is this connectivity that happens to bring people in and to bring amenities outward, right? What does that exchange look like? And you know, sometimes the car is that. So we're going to go to let's look at the Jamboard. Now we're on page 2. This is my first time using Jamboard, so apologies that I'm mixing up our pages here. And what are we seeing? Why haven't some of these proposals we've been hearing about happening? What are our biggest barriers? And I know, like, money, right? Money. So let's put money aside. And we've heard from people like Heather, who's got a clear vision for something that wants to be implemented. We heard from Brad, who's been thinking about specific blocks for a long time and how this stuff might be supported. So outside of money, why haven't some of these changes that we're dreaming of, why haven't they been done?
Todd, yeah, I'd love to answer that question because I've been dealing with that for all the times in my civic involvement throughout my life. There's 2 parts to the way in which you can get things done. One is, of course, money. The other is the human resource that's out there, you know, the actual getting out there and making it happen. And how that needs to being more engaged now, especially because of the pandemic that has occurred, is to ask people to help, okay? And for some reason, over the years, and it's been more of a problem recently, where we have gotten more siloed than ever before, and I'm including the bureaucrats and politicians, no offense to anybody that's involved with that profession, but is that they tend to think that once they get in office or get in a high position, we don't need your help. We've got this, okay? You don't have it. We're on the ground, we're out there, we're trying to make things happen. What you have to do is be willing to listen to others that are out there in the community and trying to make things happen. And the way you do that is exactly what is happening today. I think this is great. This opportunity to really engage people in the community and
large group. So yes, welcome back from your breakout groups. I hope your discussion was engaging and informative. I hope you were able to share your questions or comments in the chat, in the discussion, in the Post-it note tool, because we want to be able to refer back to these notes and share what we've learned. So I want to just take a moment to kind of hear from our facilitators, just a sliver of what you discussed. I'm going to give each of our facilitators just a couple minutes to report back to the large group, to share kind of what the discussion explored, what you found most striking of the ideas, and you know, whatever you wanted to kind of bring back to the larger group in this wrap-up moment. So Julius, if you could start us out with a summary of what you all talked about in your group.
Yeah, there was a lot of really great discussions. I think something that that immediately stood out that I think sort of applied to all three aspects of what we're doing here. So the dream, but also addressed to the practicality and next steps, was mutual aid, which is something that has, you know, developed and that's kind of grown since the pandemic, and that also sort of intersects with this ability for us to, you know, meet people where they're at, right? There have been mutual aid networks that have expanded since the pandemic, and something that was discussed and brought up was, you know, we can piggyback off of what's already been there. Another thing that came up, and something that sort of just something I noticed, which tends to be like a problem like in Portland and in these spaces, was, you know, creating spaces that are actually inclusive to the conversation and allowing BIPOC folks to actually come to the table. So something that was said just at the very end was, even the timing of this event is somewhat problematic because it falls smack dab in the middle of the workday. And, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that here we are having a discussion about global equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the majority of the folks in the conversation are white, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But what came out of that conversation, again, as a result, were folks talking about how they can be more open. And while that's a conducive and productive conversation in its own right, it still misses the way in which we actively meet folks where they are. And so the last thing I'll say that I think came up, which kind of sums up some of the other things, so sorry folks who said great things and I'm not mentioning here, was, you know, finding tangible ways to deal with sort of the realities of the historical legacy of inequality in Portland, racial inequality in Portland. So, you know, finding ways to address where, like, what past wrong, so not having green space, not having parks, and then also getting out of the way. So when folks do start to do new things, how we can help them by facilitating that further, but not being paternalistic in our approach, not thinking we know best. And when I'm saying we, it's those with wealth, power, money, right? Those who are here in this conversation, not the communities that we're actively attempting to support with that, right? So that's things that came up for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Julius. Now we want to hear from Todd.
We had really good ideas come up and stayed a lot in the daydreaming but embedded in it were the reasons why a lot of these things, the challenges before them. So really wanting to, you know, I think a lot of the ideas were beginning with a premise of let's get quickly beyond businesses, right? It's not about healthy business permits, it's not privatization of public space, it's public space, and what does that mean? And in terms of shutting down streets for that use, thinking broader, engaging the community to do that, maybe thinking about road diets came up, as well as just thinking of partially shutting down streets and really being mindful about how that's done and thinking about that in inclusive ways. One thing that was great in our group is that we had people who were working with really specific ideas, really specific proposals that when you hear them, you think, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. But have found that, you know, some of the barriers that have come up seems to, you know, initially we heard things like a lack of consensus. Of course, money is always an issue. But as we're dreaming big, I think we already have a lot that we can leverage. We just heard from a couple ideas that are already happening, but we know that throughout the city, there are people with amazing ideas doing great proposals, and it's just a matter of bravely doing them.
Thank you, Todd. Professor Corbin.